Started my first startup in '97. The world told me I was insane.
Our goal is creating future economies that are more regenerative and sustainable.
Something didn't match up. Why hasn't this become the next big thing? And that's where we invested.
The whole purpose of achieving anything in life is measurement.
Everyone, welcome to the Roadmap to Your Digital Twin Strategy session. As a general reminder, unless you're a presenter, please make sure your audio and video are off at this time. I'm personally thrilled for this panel. Anyone who's been in construction tech, AEC tech has heard the phrase digital twin thrown around in the industry for quite a while. I think it means different things to a lot of different stakeholders in the industry. So personally, I'm excited to have an objective conversation about what's happening in the digital twin space and potentially what the long-term evolutionary cycle for that product is. I'm going to go ahead and pass. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Anton. I'll let you quickly introduce yourself. I can read descriptions for everyone's bio. I would actually really like to, but again, I don't want to make everyone bear the terrible audio. So Anton, I'll give you a shot if you want it.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yes.
So hey everyone, thanks Nick for bringing us together. My name is Anton DeBuncio. I'm the Chief Operations Officer at Via Technic. We are a consulting firm focused on the digital transformation for the real estate and construction industry. Via Technic has really helped power the migration from analog processes to digital platforms for large owners of real estate, government agencies, and leading general contractors. I'm super excited because we have a really fantastic panel here today centered around digital twins. We're joined by amazing leaders who span the various stakeholders of digital twins, and will cover various subjects such as what is a digital twin, what should a roadmap look like, and how to get started. Before we begin, I'd like to pass the conversation to my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. Sandra, do you want to get going?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Benson. I have several titles. I just recently joined Procore as their global head of industry transformation. I'm on the board of advisors for Via Technic, so I enjoy working with them. And on October 1st, I will be joining the board of directors at the National Institute of Building Sciences for a 3-year term. So look forward to an interesting conversation about this topic.
Excited to have you, Sandra. Danielle?
All right, make sure I'm off mute there. I'm Danielle O'Connell, Director of Emerging Technology at Skanska USA Building. We are really a group of problem solvers who act as a conduit for our business in connecting our project teams with technology, our clients with technology, and really enabling technology adoption throughout our organization. So excited to be here.
My turn?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, sorry, Phil. Go for it.
Can you hear me now? Is the one thing. Can you hear me? Sweet. Yeah. We're in business. I'm Phil Lazarus. I am the digital delivery leader for the Connect Chicago Alliance. We are the program management team that's delivering an $8.5 billion program of works for Chicago's O'Hare and Midway International Airports. These projects include new terminals, new concourses, an underground tunnel, and about 200 plus enabling and preparatory works to allow the big stuff to happen. I've written all the standards, and now we're managing and policing the digital deliverables from the various consultants and contractors involved with the job, and acting as a gatekeeper for that information to be ported into our client, the Chicago Department of Aviation, their BIM 360 environment to be used as the foundation for a digital twin that's going to include a lot of other technology on the operational end that includes GIS, all kinds of wayfinding, measurement, validation, and real-time analytics for the building. It's a pretty exciting job, and I'm grateful to be here today.
Thanks, Phil. We're glad to have you. To kick it off, Nick actually mentioned something that we were discussing as we were prepping for the panel. It's like a lot of people have confusion around what is the definition of a digital twin. And I'd like to pose this question to you because as we were talking, we all had our own way of describing it. So, whoever wants to jump in first and who's most excited about their definition, please, let's hear it.
I'm happy to jump in if you'd like to start it off.
Yeah.
It's an area that I've said this before. If I ask 10 people what a digital twin is, I will get at least 12 different answers. So, so I kind of thought about it this way. I mean, digital twins kind of started out. Well, let me rephrase this. I think that the confusion has come along a lot of it with terminology, right? So the original definition of a digital twin was just a virtualized representation of a physical thing. That's more of a Wikipedia description, right? But in some cases, that's still how it's like building systems for monitoring and that kind of thing. But that sort of thing is actually closer to a smart building, which adds another definition to our acronyms or our library. But a smart building and digital twin aren't the same. A smart building, in my mind, is a subset of a digital twin. So, and the smart building gives us near real-time information about a building when it's occupied and utilized throughout that whole phase of its life. I like to think of that as an operational twin. But so just to confuse this further, I've actually heard now another term called digital twin smart building. So I think this panel is well timed. And I think the confusion comes from two main areas. One is the emphasis on BIM software and how BIM software is focused on physical space represented digitally, right? And the problem with that is that BIM is for collaboration and visualization during design and construction, but not operations and maintenance. BIM was never designed for real-time operational responses. And BIM is focused on buildings, not people. So I think that's one area that I think is causing the confusion. And the second, again, as I mentioned before, is just the early definition. So those are sort of my thoughts on how we got to where we are and what I think a digital twin is.
And Phil, I know when we were chatting, being in the middle of the airport where you're seeing a lot of the value of where the digital twins are going, how are you guys defining this subject?
It's a great question. I think from our end, I mean, as a program manager, I think we're very focused on a digital twin. Digital twin can be all kinds of things, as Sandra mentioned, but we're focused on sort of the entire corpus of data around this asset that comes out of the delivery of the project. So all the design drawings, all the design models, the construction stage models, the construction, the fabrication drawings, all that kind of stuff. And we're very focused on organizing that so it can be packaged and handed over to our client. Now, I'm kind of with Sandra in that I don't think that in and of itself is the whole picture. It's not the whole story. I think a digital twin, you have static sort of pieces to it, which is this body of data that's just sort of there and it's done. And then you have very dynamic pieces, which can be the smart building functionality. It can be how you use and interact with that data. Whether you want to manage your inventories or use it in facility management, how that becomes dynamic, how you start to track it and link it to things like service tickets, that's all there. But I think for us in the beginning stages, if you want to talk about, what's that first step towards the digital twin? Well, the first thing you've got to do is kind of get your static information organized. I don't necessarily think you go out and necessarily have to build 3D models of every asset you've got, But in our case, we've got a big capital works program that's really giving us the horsepower to get started, and that's where we're starting.
Awesome. I think Danielle, your dog wanted to share some stuff too.
I know.
But a unique perspective was from Danielle. Not a lot of people know that Skanska is also a developer. You guys develop and build. And how do you, as a developer, owner, and builder, think about digital twins?
Yeah, so I started to, I think my definition may have aligned with Sandra and Phil, but it's evolved over time, and I've started to think of it more as a process. And really that process through which we look at our smart building technology, our IoT devices, our analytics, like what are these things telling us? And then integrate that with the visualization tools that we're building through our 3D building models, right? Or systems models, whatever it may be. So as Sandra said, I think it depends who you ask, what the definition may be, but really trying to dissect it in that way. And then also try to analyze what are the things that we're already doing that feed that digital twin, right? So then it does become that bigger process. And it's looking at how does reality capture feed that twin, and how does our coordination process, maybe an enhanced coordination process, feed that twin, and how can we leverage our as-builts? And so that's just overall, there's so many pieces and parts that fit into it.
Okay, and how do you, I think understanding it's a process is something, but how do you tie that into the technology behind it? Obviously, you need a process to make it work, but you also need the technology to make it work. What are things you guys look for in a technology, and what are some of the outputs you're looking at to generate value?
So I think it depends on who the end user is. And that's where we started dissecting this even further, is beginning with the end in mind and looking at what is the value add to a tenant in a space? What is the value add to a leasing brokerage, someone that's going to divest the building or to attract tenants to that space? What's the value to the operations team, the folks on the facility side who are going to be responsible for operating the building? And so because that looks so different to each stakeholder, we start evaluating, are there pieces and parts, or there are different systems that come together that build out this greater platform that is the digital twin. So I don't have like a specific answer as it's this, and this, but it does mean something different to each stakeholder that's part of the process.
I love it. And something we spoke about frequently as we were preparing for the call too, for the panel. Who are the right stakeholders to bring in? And this is something, Phil, you had a lot to say about. Who do you bring in the right stakeholders, and how do you bring that in? How do you bring that in?
I'm sorry, Anton, I can't understand you. Your connection is a little bit janky there, man.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
A little bit.
Oh, sorry, is this better?
Yeah.
So in terms of the stakeholders, I was mentioning it's something that we talked about extensively as we were prepping for the panel. And how do you engage? What's the right way to engage the stakeholders, and who are these stakeholders?
I'm going to wing it. I'm going to do the best I think. I can't really understand anything you said, but I'll do the best I can with it. And, when it comes to the stakeholders that are involved, it's going to vary pretty widely depending upon what kind of assets you're talking about. So I'm in aviation today, but in the past, I've done projects for pharmaceutical clients. I've done projects with casino clients. I've done educational projects, residential projects, all different kinds of projects. And what you find is that end user's profile is going to vary quite dramatically. And the stakeholders you bring in and their concerns will equally vary. Not only that, but enterprise by enterprise, their ability and interest in engaging with a digital twin is going to vary. You know, if you're talking about a Home Depot versus a casino versus a pill factory, you know, it's all going to be very different. And each of those enterprises in and of themselves is going to have a different appetite for investing in the kind of resources required to make this dream happen. You know, it doesn't just happen by magic. And so I think you kind of got to test the waters, and it really comes down to what that enterprise's interests really are. And once you figure that out, then it's pretty easy to drive a digital twin as a goal. It may be perfectly 100% feasible to have a digital twin without any BIM at all. That's a possibility. It just really depends upon the client and what it is they want to do and what their priorities are.
Thanks. Can you hear me better now?
No.
No. Oh my God.
I think it's an internet connection issue. Your camera is also very jittery.
Troubleshoot, and then maybe pass the for now. Let's start troubleshooting.
Yeah, Anton, it might be helpful for you to exit the video and maybe try to come back. I would also test your mic connection. And this is coming from someone whose mic connection isn't very strong currently, so.
Nick, do you have a speaker on in the room you're in?
I don't. There's something I think echoey with my mic connection. And apologies to everyone who's listening to that. So Phil, do you mind? Actually, I like the thread that you were taking. Sandra, Danielle, can we expand on kind of where Phil was going with that thread of conversation? Just, you know, we've talked a lot about the stakeholders, who are the right stakeholders to bring in. How do you do it? Just from your points of view, do you mind kind of sharing what you think? And Sandra, you can take it first.
Okay, well, I will go first, but I will say for me, I think Danielle and they bring a different perspective from where I'm at, but it does depend on what it is. It's like and what stage you're in. So, are you looking for a digital twin for new construction? That brings one set of stakeholders, right? If you're looking for a digital twin for an existing building, that may bring a second set or a different set of stakeholders to that, right? And so as far as who those are, I think it depends on where you're at. Obviously, if you're more in the design, development, commissioning kind of side of it, then you're going to be bringing in, you know, your traditional, your GCs, your owner, that kind of thing. But where I think things get interesting is when it's the other side of the operations and maintenance. It could be a new structure or an old structure. But in this case, then we're actually more focused on the tenant experience. And that tenant could be someone living in a high-rise apartment. It could be a person in an office building. It could be a factory worker. So the word tenant, I want to make sure I expand on there. But really, that experience is really important as a stakeholder. And I've seen this change in my career. When I first started working in this industry, what I found mostly was people, particularly owners, were mostly focused on driving out costs, increasing efficiency, that kind of thing. Our world has changed, as we all know. Hence, we're here doing a virtual conversation instead of in person. But people expect now things to be connected, and they expect a good experience. And so I think we're beginning to see focusing externally a little bit more. So I think we need to bring those stakeholders in. So that's a general comment. Probably about a specific project, I might have a little more detail. So maybe, Danielle, that's an area you might want to pick up.
You're on mute. You're muted.
Anton, can we see if your audio is performing better now?
Does this work better now?
We can hear you.
Oh,
Yes.
Anton, much better, man.
He's back.
Browsers. So do not use Firefox. While Danielle's working on that, we'll circle back to that question while she unmutes herself. But equally important, I think, to the stakeholders is also having given the large number of stakeholders involved, it's really important to have a champion to drive the to drive the digital twin to fruition. And I'd love to hear your take on how do you make a champion successful, and who is the right champion in the organization to bring something like a digital twin into reality? Phil, do you want to take that?
Who do you bring in as a champion to?
Who's the ideal champion, and how do you make them successful?
Sure. Well, what I've seen is that in a lot of organizations is that they say, "Oh, okay." Some executive goes to a conference like this one, and they hear about digital twins, and they say, "Oh, I got to get one of those." And they come back to the office, and they get somebody on their engineering team who maybe knows a lot about their core business, but really doesn't know anything about BIM, and they say, Jim, Sally, go get me a digital twin, make it happen. And that has become the de facto champion. And that person's like, okay, well, what the heck do I do? And at that point, that's where some funny things start to happen inside of an organization. And how the approach goes can really vary, and the success can vary pretty wildly too in terms of what that champion does. The places where I've seen it go well is that champion goes out and finds somebody who really knows the subject matter, whether that's someone like me or Sandra or Danielle, or hires via Technic, or somehow gets somebody to come in and sort of work with them. But over and over again, what I've seen is that digital specialists are starting to have a home in organizations that have large real estate holdings and capital investment budgets. What do I mean by that? If you want a digital twin to happen, you've kind of got to set up the rules. And unfortunately, you can't just buy the rules off the shelf. You can't just hire a consultant and say, write me up the digital twin rules and then move along. No, it has to be about bringing somebody into the organization to start to understand the organizational priorities, the organizational drivers, the sort of business concerns, all that kind of stuff, the nuances of how capital investment goes along. And once you understand that, then you can start to put together an appropriate structure and strategy to deliver on it. But you have to have a reality. You have to have a core of somebody who really understands the business, that internal champion, and they have to be able to bring in somebody who's a real digital specialist. And I don't see it. This isn't a 6-month kind of thing. I mean, the places I've seen it go well, it's a 3 to 5 year process to really start to change how a business responds to these things. And I think the approach of a Home Depot, where they're always building their big boxes, versus maybe a standalone or maybe a hospitality company, let's say Hilton. How does Hilton go about their business? Well, they actually don't own that many properties. They sort of do lease kind of agreements and stuff. So everyone's going to be a little bit different. And the only way to really understand it is for big organizations to start embracing this in a way that brings specialists like us into their houses. If they want, everybody wants the muscles, but nobody wants to go to the gym. Well, digital specialists at the gym.
I love it. Thanks for that. Danielle, I take you have some things to add to that too.
I definitely do. I think this isn't a one-person job. So we say champion, but it needs to be a group of champions, and it needs to be across multiple stakeholders. And I say that because this is a cultural shift as well. And I think if we don't recognize that we're setting up that champion, that individual, we're not setting them up for success. I think, it requires buy-in from the entire organization. There needs to be someone that is involved from planning through construction, at building turnover, and then beyond, to help with that continuous improvement stream and to provide feedback and just to keep building upon this digital twin initiative. So I think it's a group of champions.
Great. And something you mentioned, Phil, was that, hey, this takes 3 to 5 years. If it takes that long, it's very hard for organizations to actually do it unless they know what the end goal looks like. What does success look like? What does the art of the possible look like? Can the panel elaborate on, hey, we always talk about digital twins being this fancy thing, but what does success look like once it's there?
Well, Sandra touched on that a few minutes ago. I mean, she said, what she said is true, that it wasn't just a few years ago that building owners are looking for increased efficiency and productivity. That's still what businesses want now. Absolutely, 100%. And that's why knowing the business becomes very, very important. Understanding what a business wastes on not having adequate documentation of their as-bills. What does a business waste by not tracking real-time temperature throughout their facilities, whether their energy usage, whatever that is. You don't get to that instantly. It takes a while to gather up that data, start tracking it, and turn it into real dollars and cents. So what does success look like? Well, success can look like a 30% reduction in your energy bills. And depending upon how many assets you've got, that could turn into some real cash. Sandra, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. And so I'm going to give a more generic, because I think there's lots of different factors, and I agree with all of you guys on 3 to 5. And I will say something that maybe is slightly controversial, and I worry in North America specifically, where companies are publicly traded. I worry about the long-term 3 to 5 because they've got quarterly reporting, and frequently it's very difficult to keep someone focused on something that long term. But that being aside, I think from a very esoteric answer of what a successful digital twin is, it allows you to adjust a building in real time to respond to either behavior patterns of people, patterns of material, the environment, space, design, any of those kinds of things in the physical asset. So that's a little more esoteric than specific numbers. So I think you have to, but that's a general definition of success, but that's never going to be enough for a company to launch into that, right? But underneath that is sort of the things Phil mentioned, which is the specific industry, the specific structure. Then we should be able to come up with specific metrics that support this sort of general idea of combining the physical and the digital. Digital informs physical, physical informs digital. So Danielle, what are your thoughts?
I think you both touched on them, but a bigger picture, operational efficiency is certainly going to equal success. That proactive versus reactive maintenance, and to be able to, save the life of some of our major pieces of equipment in a building, that customer or tenant satisfaction, if we can drive that up and we have less complaints coming from them, that's going to be extremely important. And I think, looking at it from like a commercial development side, the divestment value. So what are the things that we can do as we go and prepare to sell this building to another owner, to show them that this building has systems that we've taken care of in such a way because we have used the digital twin, and therefore it is a benefit to them, and it becomes a real value add.
Right. And I would also add sustainability, worker safety. I mean, so there are specific hard numbers, if you will, efficiencies and that kind of thing. But I think there's also some of what I'll call softer, happier workers, safer workers, more sustainable, those kind of things that are a little bit harder to measure. But I think companies are taking into account now more than ever.
Yeah, and I want to share like 3 examples to something that you all touched on around some of the value of digital twins, and something we're seeing our clients and why they care about digital twins too, is that on temperature control alone, I think a lot of research studies around workforce productivity is that if the temperature is off by a degree than the ideal temperature, you lose a certain percentage of workforce productivity. So think about that for all the Googles or Amazons of the world, where their workforces are extremely valuable. There's a large dollar value to that. And then Danielle, you mentioned something about divestment and trading real estate or selling your real estate. And we were on the project, one of the largest, tallest buildings in the United States, where a large private equity firm acquired it, but didn't have really any documentation on all the systems in there. So now they had to spend all these dollars because no one knew what is in there, and it hasn't been touched since, the 60s or 70s. And so it's like things like that are reasons why a lot of owners in particular are paying attention to digital twins right now. It's just like it's becoming very real. And one really interesting example is there's a facility in Chicago that they tied their cameras to the building systems, and if you walk in there with a firearm, that building will lock down that area. And it's like now it's touching like, hey, really touching health and safety, and how these facilities can start responding to real-time threats. So something I'm really curious about too is, so let's say, it takes 3 to 5 years. There's a lot of value to this at the end, but I'm sure there's a lot of mistakes and a lot of lessons learned that a lot of you all have gone through. I'd love to learn more about, hey, what are things that we should do right, or some of the mistakes that we don't want to do again?
I think the only thing that I want to add real quick before Phil and Danielle jump in is I'm not sure there really is an end. I think we talk about 3 to 5, but in theory, if we really are going to have the digital and the virtual, feeding each other, if you will, I don't know that it ever ends. I think it, in theory, is an ongoing process. I could be wrong, but and maybe we'll call it something else. We'll come up with another term to confuse it even more in a few years. But
I hope it never ends. I mean, this keeps us employed. It keeps us working.
Yeah, I agree.
And when I say 3 to 5 years, I don't mean that it takes 3 to 5 years and you're done. I think it means it takes 3 to 5 years to actually start showing some real legitimate results that actually make you feel like, yeah, we've done something. I remember one job that I had, and I was working for a private developer, and it was about an 8-month job to really sell them the strategy and then make the first hire. And then once that first guy came in, it was, it was, 8-9 months down the line. And finally we had our first model of a project that was going on. I could start to show these people that work with, here's our project, guys. This is what we're doing now. And they're like, what? Our building's going to look like what? Yeah, that's great. When you bring in your own resources, you can do all kinds of fun things. It's interesting. There's a question in the chat about, as the BIM and digital twin platforms converge from different angles, what's your advice to AEC firms providing digital twin services? Pick one or support multiples. And I think that's, well, I don't necessarily feel it's the right question, because I've worked with some clients, I've seen some projects where the client relied entirely upon a services provider to maintain the digital twin for them. Now, 10 years down the road, all the models, all the drawings, all the everything for all of this client's projects, and they had a pretty vast campus, is on the BIM 360 environment for their consultant. And that client can't do anything now, because they've got to get all this information out of their consultant. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot. I'm of the opinion that really it's the client's job to take this seriously and say, okay, listen, I'm going to have to make some fundamental investments for my long-term good. And that's where I believe having a specialist like us involved at a client level, not as a consultant level, but actually a card-carrying member of a company that has a capital expenditure budget. And that's where the magic's going to happen. Otherwise, you're kind of opening yourself up. And then once you have somebody inside that can sort of drive in particular directions and make some strategic procurement decisions, are we going to go Autodesk? Are we going to go Bentley? Are we going to do Procore? Whatever it is. Then you start to drive those decisions down your supply chain. And then it makes a lot more sense for everybody because, okay, I'm going to specify to anybody who works for me, you're going to use Revit now. You're going to use, Intergraph now if we're doing oil and gas facilities. You're going to use Bentley stuff if we're like a train company, transit authority. And all those decisions have to be made centrally. I mean, it's the client's data.
Right. It
really is. And it's really up to them to put all that kind of stuff together.
Well, I think the days of the GC, of an owner just handing it off to a GC and saying, just go over there and build it and let me know when you're done, and the only real conversations relate to cost or schedule overruns, I think those days are dwindling. I spent a lot of time in the oil and gas side of EPCs, and those owners are extremely involved. And I think we're seeing success from there. And I do think we're seeing more and more of that. But even if you take just something like sustainability goal or something, you can't throw that on a general contractor. The owner has to own that. And then from a technology side, Phil, I think that's the concept of a platform and an open platform. I do think the owners need to say, this is whatever on this project, it's horizontal construction. We want you to use this, and this one's vertical. We want to use that. But I do think having an open platform is extremely important so everyone can collaborate. Those are my two thoughts.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, and I want to just touch on what I said earlier about the digital twin being more of a process, because I think that helps us avoid which platform is it, or can we be agnostic? I think if we approach it more along the lines of, maybe there is a platform in mind, and I think it's okay to name one, but what are the standards that are going to allow us to get there? And the standards around data, the standards around modeling. And if we're not setting that up at the very beginning, then we're not going to set ourselves up for success. And in that case, it shouldn't matter which platform we use. I think one of the other things I'm thinking of is, I was on a call with a client recently, and we talked about there should be a spec section for this, right? Because we're talking about interoperability of systems. And so if you start looking at platforms, everything looks beautiful on the user interface. It's like, look, I can highlight this space or this piece of equipment in this model of this floor and get exactly what I'm looking for. But there is so much behind the scenes work that goes into cleaning that data, cleaning up those models, sometimes scanning just to create those models. So what does that process look like for new buildings, for existing buildings? How do we even get those pieces of data to a point that we can use them for this digital twin? So that's my recommendation. Think of it more like that, and then the platform can come in time once those questions have been answered.
And I think that the comment about the process being a process is extremely critical to reflect on, because if you think about the rate of change of technology runs way faster than the 3 to 5 year, jump start that's needed to get things going. Mm-hmm. So it's like really understanding it's a process is important, because the technology is changing faster than you're able to implement it and continuously change. And over time, if you just look back historically, when did BIM 360 even come about? That is fairly recent. So what's going to happen next year? What's going to happen 2 years from now? It's like, what are your thoughts on how do you manage, try to see into the future, and how do you try to manage knowing that things are going to change? How do we make our program flexible enough?
Maybe it's data focused. Maybe that's the answer, right? It's like as long as the data has some standard to follow, and I don't know that I have the best answer for this, but as long as the data is consistent, maybe it won't matter which platform we're plugging it into. As long as we're we're tracking the same things. We are able to analyze that data and improve our performance because of it. And we're building more efficient buildings. Sustainability is coming to play. Then we can keep up perhaps with the technology. I even think of like technology that we adopt in our projects. Our projects are often an average of 2 years long, right? So something that we adopted at the beginning of one project may be obsolete. Site cameras is a perfect example, right? Camera technology evolves so quickly that if you asked me 2 years ago what I would use, it might be something completely different than what we use today. So how do we, approach that in more of a data-centric way, and then let the technology kind of evolve and try to keep up with it in that way? And maybe it's a project by project basis. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective, because you're right. Every time we turn around, there's more IoT devices. And, 3 guys in a truck just came up with a really great idea. So, that kind of thing happens a lot. I think it's really more of how can we plug that in. Obviously you guys know I came from AWS, but I learned an awful lot more about cloud computing than I thought I ever would. And at this point, now 2 years from now, maybe there's something else. But at this point, I think it has to be cloud native. I don't think there can be, I think we've got to get past the on-prem and that kind of thing, or else we're not going to be able to be nimble enough to bring in that technology as quickly as we can. So that's my perspective on it, because the technology is going to keep coming, and certain things that are really cool today will be, obsolete next week. Well, hopefully not next week, next year, something like that. Phil, what do you think?
I'm going to take the contrary.
Okay.
Here, because technology is changing. Technology is always there, but the fact is, people who own and run buildings are conservative and risk averse. And I get a lot of people ring me up with zippy new technologies, and it's probably not the message for a VC conference, but it is the truth, which is, and I think it's all interesting, and it certainly gives ideas. But if you're trying to spec something up for a building, you want to make sure the people you're doing business with are going to be there in 5 years. And so, sort of startup nifty new technologies are great, and they're interesting and they're important. But as a building owner, I think you tend to look for things with a little bit more of a track record. That's just kind of my experience. Now, that's notwithstanding. I mean, the level of investment and commitment required to effect a change, I think, also really impacts your choice in whether or not you want to try a new product or tool or whatever. If it's around, I really love that example that Anton gave about, artificial intelligence to start to recognize, to take feeds from CCTV cameras and then set off alarms. To me, that's a fairly low risk, easy to test kind of thing to implement. And that's really very, very different from saying, okay, we're going to take everything in our portfolio of 500 buildings across the nation, and I just saw this really cool app at a tech conference in San Francisco, and we're going that way. Not going to happen. Simply not going to happen. So I think there's a real balance to be struck. But God, Sandra, I wish we could go entirely off-prem with everything. I look forward to the day when I don't have to have a computer to run Revit or do any of that kind of stuff, because it could just all be up in the cloud. It's just also silly to me at this point, but
yeah,
we are where we are.
Yeah, and that's a process. That's a whole other kind of conversation, I guess, sort of in and of itself. But that is a process. It's a process that's moving. But I do think the one thing that when I've talked to you, like real estate developers or something like that, big property owners, just like you said, Phil, every building is different. And just because some cool whiz-bang thing came along that might work in that building doesn't mean, so, I mean, if you think about the building management systems out there, whether it be Siemens, Honeywell, I'm not trying to pick on any one, but there are many out there. I don't know of a single company that can look at their entire portfolio and say, we only run the Siemens building management system. So therefore, there we can get analytics. The reality is that there's all kinds of different systems there. And you're going to acquire and divest buildings. So the concept of having one is never going to work, right? So that's where I think the concept of being able to bring things, this is where the cloud for me comes in, to be able to bring things in from those systems, to be able to ingest that information and then begin to do analytics, whether that be real time, predictive, prescriptive, that kind of thing. Because I don't think that, I agree, I don't see none of us knows what the future holds, but it's the data more than the system, I think. So.
And maybe it's building partnerships with those providers too, right? So if you do lock down a system that works for most of your projects or your buildings, then it's how do you build that partnership so that you can work together to keep up with the evolving technology and the features, right? I think that's something that's going to become really important.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. In my years doing this, I have found that we all talk about data and all this, but there's some actual contractual issues that I think cause us problems in the industry. It's kind of that dirty little secret that no one really wants to talk about, but the design firm is paid when they do 30, 60, 90, right? The contractor's taking whatever that is, and it may not really be 30%, but the design firm is kind of pushing. So, there's a lot of these contractual issues that actually affect this industry. And that's a little off topic, Anton, as it relates to digital twins. But if we're really going to transform this industry, things like that have to be looked at as well. The fact that some of those contracts were designed 100 years ago makes me very, very sad.
Hey Sandra, there's a great question up there for you. I think that should go right to your heart.
Let me see. Where is the question?
What do you see as being the leading schema and standard for building data?
Okay. Well, I will say this: there is a reason that I left AWS, because I couldn't be on this board of National Institute of Building Sciences. And one of the things that we are tasked to do in this 3 years is to come up with the answer to that question. So if I had the answer right now, I would tell you, but I don't. But I can tell you there's focus on it now for the first time. I think infrastructure bill, the Harville in Florida, that kind of thing. And what I really like is we're actually getting more involvement from Europe and from Canada. And so it's going to hopefully, I don't see any really international, I don't really see that happening, but I am seeing some collaboration. So I guess the answer to the question is, I start on that board on October 1st, so maybe I could get back to you after that.
Stay tuned.
Are you looking for a blog post?
Yeah.
I will. I promise you I will. I don't know if it'll be October 2nd, but it will be. It will come about.
But related to that, right? Like as a standard setting body, and as people who are interested in standards, do you give people the leeway to localize it to their project, or do you be very specific around data standards? What are some of your thoughts around that? I know we talked about this in the past, and I'm curious, how you all think about being very specific or giving leeway to adjust to changing conditions.
Well, I can't speak for that entire organization. I am on the steering committee for the BIM Standards Committee, which is going on now, and that is the biggest challenge. It's a challenge in any standard. You've got to find that right. that right mix of flexibility and consistency, right? You make it too rigid, people will do their own thing. They will find a way no matter what. If you make it too flexible, the standards really don't mean anything. And I realize, Anton, I did not give you a specific answer, but I don't know. I think the work really, that to me is the art, not the science, right? Of is BIM required on every project? Are we going to say that? I don't know.
Yes, we are going to say that. Danielle and I, we are going to say that.
No vested
interest. Then I will get you nominated on this committee, and you can get involved. And I absolutely agree personally, but I mean that is those are the things we're talking about. I apologize. I can't really speak for that entire committee. That would be premature. Yeah.
So I'm gonna come at this. One of the things I left out of my bio is that I worked overseas for 15 years, and so I have a lot of exposure and experience with working with international standards, whether that's the UK standards or stuff that I worked on in Singapore or other places. And standards, I believe, are only as good as the contractual obligations and outcomes they drive. If nothing, why are you doing it? But that's fairly client-centric. Now, since coming back to the US about 2 years ago, one of the things that I've really enjoyed is that there are actually a lot of standards in place already for various aspects of building management or project delivery, what have you. The Army Corps of Engineers has standardized a lot, but not a lot of people really want to read it. It's not great reading. It's not great reading, but it's very, very informative. And if you want a standard, it's there. We've gone down that road for a lot of the civil design work and requirements that were for incoming deliverables at the airport because it makes sense. It's civil design, Army Corps of Engineers. That's the gold standard for the U.S. There's other stuff out there from the GSA that we've found that's been very, very helpful in standardizing nomenclature around building, tagging assets within the building to be linked through the SCADA systems into the building management system. These are standards that already exist. So when we talk about where standards going next or what a national standard should be, let's take a look at what we have. Now, if you look at what they've done in the UK, their standard is a lot more about standardizing a process rather than picking a software or mandating that every single building project must turn in a 3D model. That's what they did in Singapore. And the problem when you do that is that all of a sudden municipalities have to have somebody in place to police that. All of a sudden they're on the hook to put some resources there to review this stuff and start cataloging, and it becomes a big nightmare. You don't really want that either. So there is a real balance to be struck here, but there's a lot of good stuff here already. I'm not a big Kobe guy. I've never actually seen a building that did it well and did it to create any real value. Seen a lot of people talk about it from podiums, but I haven't actually seen the goods. That's a different story. But Sandra, by all means, if you're looking for an independent guy to make a lot of noise, I'm happy to help.
I just wrote your name down. But I will say we actually do have representation from the European Council, and we've had process. It is process. I mean, data is nothing but something that comes from a process. It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. So
drop out of the sky.
We have about 4 minutes left. I wanted to close by maybe asking a final question of how do you get, let's say people are all excited to implement a digital twin into their projects now or their portfolio of real estate. Any advice for how to get started? Danielle, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think, think about your business and your end users, as I mentioned earlier, your existing staff, your existing standards, or do you have any standards? So start evaluating what you already have in place that could potentially feed this digital twin vision, and connect with someone that can help you to build out those building blocks and just make it successful. Phil, Sandra, thoughts?
Okay, the number one thing you should do if you want digital twins, you should hire Danielle because she knows this stuff like the back of her hand. Reach out to her on LinkedIn. go get her. But outside of that, I think, really, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. There's a period of time of exploration when a company wants to embark upon an initiative, and you have to do that. And usually they're not going to invest in somebody internally to do that. And you get some consulting help to help you figure out sort of the general gist of what you need to do. But at some point, an investment has to be made by a company to say, okay, we're going to buy this types of technology to store our data. Man, we're going to invest in these kinds of resources to manage our data and help us put together a standardized approach. If you're lucky, you've got a big capital works project in front of you that can help you start it out. If you're not, then it's a little bit of a different approach. But really bringing in specialized help to help an organization understand what they need to do, and then being bullish about going to get it. If you're not sold on the idea that's really going to generate value for you, then it's going to be a tough time to do things. And that's very different from saying, is BIM valuable in capital improvement projects? Absolutely it is. That's been proven over and over and over again. If organizations want to capture that value, clients want to capture that value, you've got to get to the table. And that's the thing. Get to the table, get your feet under there, roll up your sleeves, and get to work.
I guess I come at it as more general again. And it's because I've got, Phil, you mentioned earlier, somebody, CFO goes somewhere and they come back and they want a digital twin. So go get me one. And, so I just go get them a little representative, little model of the New York Empire State Building, put it on their desk. There, now you got your twin. But, and not suggesting you do that, but that works. But, what I really try to do is say, first of all, do you know what a digital twin is? Do you need a digital twin? But most importantly, what's the business outcome you're trying to accomplish? I mean, we don't do technology for technology's sake, and we shouldn't change processes just for their sake. So what's the outcome? Because I can't tell you how many companies I've gone to, and so they either don't know the outcome. So sometimes I'll help and I'll give them, here's 15 potential use cases. Which one do you think? Well, I don't know. Let's see, we could really do this one, or, so, I mean, I guess I have to say, love all, I work for a technology company. Technology is fabulous and all this, but at the end of the day, what are you trying to accomplish? If you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, no offense, Danielle or Anton or anyone, if you don't have some concept of what you're trying to accomplish, I'm not real sure you're ready to even have that conversation. I am happy to see companies starting to bring in chief digital officers or transformation officers, because I don't see this as a back-end IT kind of thing. It really does have to be forward-leaning. So I don't mean to throw cold water on. I just think you need to have an idea of what outcome. And I would say don't try to boil the ocean. Get that outcome, add another outcome, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to build off what you mentioned, Sandra, is like, knowing the business outcomes is pretty critical. One thing that we usually start out with when we're advising clients in digital twins is like, understand what is the business strategy, first of all, and link the digital twin strategy to the business strategy. Because if it's not linked to that, executive changes, you're done. Your program's done. But if it's linked to the business strategy, then it's very easy to say, if you get rid of this, you're going to remove critical legs to your business strategy. So it's, I think, something that people should definitely think about. Great. I think that's, I don't know if you have any other questions out here, but wanted to thank everyone for your time and super valuable advice. It was great having you all here and sharing your insights. So thank you very much, Phil, Sandra, Danielle.
Thank you.
Great conversation. I'm sure there'll be many more conversations on digital twins before any of us retire. So
That's right. I look forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.